A powerful nor'easter is now organizing along the eastern seaboard, and the latest data confirms that this system is gaining strength. Over the past several days, guidance has shifted, adjusted, and gradually come into better agreement. What began as wide disagreement between forecast models is now narrowing into a more focused solution. This storm has structure, moisture, and cold air aligning at just the right time. While there are still important details to resolve, the overall signal is clear. A significant winter event is unfolding. The key now is refining placement, timing, and snowfall intensity as the system strengthens offshore. Forecast modeling earlier in the week painted very different pictures. One major model showed an aggressive storm with substantial snowfall totals inland, while another suggested a much weaker outcome with limited impacts. Over time, those extremes have moderated. Instead of clinging to either outlier, the smarter approach has been to evaluate trends. Now, we're seeing convergence. The stronger solution has eased slightly, and the weaker one has trended upward. That middle ground often proves closest to reality in dynamic coastal storms. The takeaway is confidence increasing in a notable snowfall event, particularly closer to the coast. The American guidance initially projected widespread heavy snow from the mid-Atlantic into southern New England. Some of those early projections suggested more than a foot of accumulation stretching from near Washington, D.C. toward Philadelphia. While that scenario now appears somewhat overdone for inland cities, it highlighted the storm's potential. Importantly, this model handled storm initialization well, capturing the early development and moisture feed accurately. That gave forecasters confidence that while totals might need adjustment, the storm itself was very real and not just a phantom system appearing on long-range charts. Meanwhile, the European guidance started off far less impressive. Just days ago, it barely showed a meaningful storm for parts of the Northeast. That solution now looks outdated. The latest runs have shifted significantly, showing a stronger and more organized system. However, it remains somewhat less aggressive than the American model with snowfall totals. This is where interpretation becomes crucial. The European model tends to handle coastal track and thermal structure well, especially with slower developing systems. Its slower timing may ultimately verify better, even if snowfall numbers require modest upward adjustment. One of the most important factors in this setup is track. With nor'easters, even a 20 to 40-mile shift can drastically alter snowfall outcomes. Cities on the edge of the heavy band could swing from moderate totals to significant accumulation with a subtle adjustment. That razor-thin gradient is typical in coastal storms. Cold air placement, ocean influence, and storm intensification all combine to create sharp cutoffs. That's exactly what we're seeing here. Inland areas may see respectable snow, but the highest totals appear increasingly likely near the immediate coastline. Timing is another piece coming into clearer focus. The faster solutions bring snow in earlier Sunday, while slower guidance delays the heaviest precipitation until Sunday night into Monday. Current trends favor a slightly slower evolution overall. That means some locations may begin with lighter precipitation, or even rain, before transition to snow. Patience will be key in areas waiting for the changeover. If snow does not begin immediately, it does not mean the storm is underperforming. The deeper moisture and stronger lift arrive later in the event. For the Washington, D.C. and Baltimore corridor, confidence is moderate but not absolute. These areas sit near a thermal boundary that could introduce mixing at times. Current projections suggest several inches of accumulation, potentially in the 4 to 5 inch range. However, any northward shift in the storm track would quickly raise those totals. Conversely, slightly warmer air could limit accumulation. This region represents one of the most sensitive forecast zones. Residents should prepare for plowable snow, but understand that final totals depend heavily on subtle atmospheric adjustments. Across Delaware and eastern Maryland, proximity to the coast increases snowfall potential. While some mixing may occur early, colder air wrapping behind the strengthening low should support accumulating snow. Totals in the 6 to 8 inch range appear plausible, especially closer to the shoreline. Coastal enhancement often boosts precipitation rates in these setups. As the storm intensifies offshore, bands can pivot inland and dramatically increase snowfall in narrow corridors. Monitoring those mesoscale features will be critical as the event unfolds. Southern and central New Jersey are increasingly favored for heavier totals. Coastal sections, in particular, could see double-digit snowfall. Inland areas may receive somewhat less, but even there, moderate accumulation is expected. The sharp gradient between heavier and lighter zones will likely set up somewhere across the state. If the storm track wobbles slightly west, higher totals could expand inland. For now, the most substantial snow appears tied to areas closer to the Atlantic influence where moisture and lift maximize. The New York City metropolitan area sits near a critical dividing line. Current projections suggest around 8 to 10 inches, though that number could climb toward a foot if heavier bands pivot overhead. Borough-to-borough differences are possible, especially depending on band placement. Coastal exposure and urban heat can also introduce minor variations. Still, confidence is growing that this will be a significant snowfall for much of the region. Snowfall rates during peak periods may be intense enough to quickly cover treated surfaces. Long Island stands out as a zone with elevated risk for higher totals. Forecast guidance consistently paints a swath of heavier snow extending across the island. Totals in the 9 to 12-inch range appear likely, with localized higher amounts possible toward eastern sections. Coastal front dynamics can enhance snowfall rates, and this setup supports that potential. The key question becomes how long the heaviest banding lingers. Prolonged intense snowfall could easily push certain communities toward the upper end of projections. Connecticut shows a north-south gradient. Southern sections, particularly closer to the coast, may see 7 to 9 inches or more. Hartford and interior areas could fall slightly lower depending on band placement. Again, the difference between moderate and significant totals may come down to storm track by a small margin. The overall signal, however, supports a solid winter event statewide. Travel conditions are expected to deteriorate as snowfall intensity increases Sunday night into Monday morning. Rhode Island appears firmly within the heavier snow axis. Current projections suggest widespread totals between 12 and 15 inches, with locally higher amounts possible in eastern and southern portions. This region frequently benefits in classic nor'easter setups, especially when the coastal load deepens offshore. The combination of strong lift and deep moisture supports efficient snowfall production. If mesoscale banding aligns properly, isolated areas could approach or exceed expectations. In Massachusetts, the sharpest contrasts emerge. Western portions may see moderate snowfall in the 4 to 6 inch range. However, moving eastward toward Worcester and then into the Boston corridor, totals increase substantially. Boston itself may receive around a foot, though slight adjustments in track could nudge that number higher or lower. The most intense band may set up just east of the city, creating a narrow corridor where amounts approach 2 feet. The Cape Cod and Islands region is particularly concerning for heavy snow potential. Forecast guidance suggests totals in the mid-teens, with isolated areas possibly nearing 17 inches. However, mixing remains a limiting factor for some locations. If warmer marine air intrudes, snowfall totals could be trimmed. That uncertainty is especially relevant for Nantucket. Even so, much of the Cape is positioned favorably for strong deformation banding that can dramatically boost accumulations. Northern Massachusetts, Vermont, and much of New Hampshire appear positioned for lighter totals compared to coastal zones. 4 to 6 inches may be common, with slightly higher amounts near the Massachusetts border. The storm's heaviest precipitation shield remains concentrated farther south and east. While still impactful, snowfall in these northern areas is not expected to match coastal intensities. The gradient between moderate and heavy snow may be particularly noticeable when traveling southward. Southern Maine warrants close attention. Coastal sections could see more significant accumulation, while northern areas experience far less. This north-south contrast reflects the storm's offshore track and evolving moisture field. Augusta and areas along Interstate 95 may observe steady snowfall, but totals diminish farther inland. The key factor will be how far north the deeper moisture wraps before the system pivots northeastward. As the storm lifts toward the Canadian Maritimes, snowfall will expand into Nova Scotia and parts of New Brunswick. Totals there may range from moderate to locally significant, though mixing could limit amounts in some coastal communities. Prince Edward Island may also see accumulating snow. However, as the low deepens and pulls north, warmer air intrusion could introduce rain in select areas, reducing overall totals. Newfoundland presents an interesting case. As the storm approaches, warm air wrapping around the system could change precipitation type in portions of the Avalon Peninsula. Some communities may experience rain or mixed precipitation rather than all snow. This thermal complication underscores how dynamic coastal systems can be. Small structural shifts within the cyclone influence precipitation type dramatically. Returning to the broader forecast philosophy, blending model guidance remains essential. The American solution provided early confidence in storm development, but appeared overly aggressive in some snowfall projections. The European model initially underplayed the event, but has since adjusted stronger. The most reasonable outcome lies between these extremes, leaning slightly toward the European timing, while incorporating modestly higher snowfall totals offers a balanced approach. Snowfall mapping now reflects that blended reasoning. Washington and Philadelphia are projected for several inches, generally under double digits. Coastal Delaware and New Jersey rise into double-digit territory. New York City hovers near the 10-inch mark with upside potential. Long Island, Rhode Island, eastern Massachusetts, and the Cape emerge as the highest risk zones for totals exceeding a foot. One consistent theme is coastal maximization. The closer a location sits to the Atlantic moisture feed, while remaining cold enough for snow, the greater the accumulation potential. Inland regions still receive snow, but without the same prolonged heavy banding. This pattern fits the classic nor'easter mold, where a narrow but intense snow corridor develops near the coast. As the system begins to wind down Monday into early Tuesday, lingering snow showers will taper from southwest and northeast. Travel impacts may persist beyond the final flakes due to blowing snow and cold temperatures. Cleanup efforts will depend heavily on where the heaviest band ultimately sets up. Preparation now ensures smoother recovery afterward. In summary, this developing nor'easter is poised to deliver its greatest impacts along coastal sections from the mid-Atlantic into southern New England. Inland cities face moderate snowfall with some uncertainty, while a thin swath near the coast could approach 2 feet in isolated spots. Track adjustments remain possible, and those shifts will determine who lands in the jackpot zone. Confidence continues to grow, and the storm's evolution over the next 24 hours will refine these projections further.